So, my name is Julie Coleman. I'm head of the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities. There are lots of familiar faces in the room. The people who work here and study here, welcome to this this doctoral inaugural lecture. The people who don't work and study here, welcome to the University of Leicester. We're really delighted to have you. This is a fantastic celebration of the achievements of two of our PhD students, both of whom were supported by collaborative doctoral awards. So Clare with Historic England and Philippa with English Heritage. So these collaborative doctoral awards enable students to work with an academic supervisor and also with support and supervision from an outside body. And what they've produced in both of these cases is research which is inherently about impact as well as about research. So it's not it's us talking to the outside world, and in both cases about heritage, which is a really, really key theme in our college. It's where most of our research funding is, and most of our research activity is, or is one of the biggest themes in the college. So I'm particularly delighted to introduce these two doctoral inaugurals. I'm going to hand you over to Clare first. Clare's over there, sorry. To Clare. Don't worry. So we'll hear about Clare's research first into religious heritage in transition, Sikh places of worship in England. You've got the microphone already.
I think I've got one, yes.
Okay.
Thanks very much. It's really nice to be back in this really big, scary lecture hall, so I feel like I've gone up in the world a little bit. And I have a bit of a confession as well. When I was kind of preparing for this talk, I realised that I can't really remember a lot of my PhD already, which might actually be quite good news to a lot of you who haven't finished yet. It does kind of disappear quite quickly, sooner than you think it will. So I'll do my best, but I might be a little bit rusty, so bear with me. So firstly, really, as has been mentioned, this was a collaborative doctoral award. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the project came to be and what the aims were. So it was developed as part of a collaborative doctoral partnership between the University of Leicester and Historic England. As I'm sure all of you know, they are the organisation who advise the government on the management and protection of the historic environment in England. I started the project in 2013, November 2013, and graduated last July. So the interest really in the project from the University of Leicester side was my supervisors, Deirdre and Ruth, in the School of Archaeology, had already begun looking at the use and development of faith spaces in the city of Leicester from an archaeological perspective, of which the Leicester Faith Trail was a part, and you can see that on the left. And then in terms of the aims of Historic England, this project is just one of several which they've commissioned over the past 5 years. So they've been looking to increase the understanding of minority faith places. And this includes a major architectural survey of the mosque in Britain, which was recently completed. And a book will be launched next month. You can see the cover of the book on the right. And researchers at the University of Leeds have also undertaken projects looking at the development of Hindu and Buddhist temples in England as well. So they're projects kind of that have been undertaken on quite big scales, a lot bigger than just me going out and talking to people. But kind of through this project, I've aimed to consider the value of Sikh Gurdwaras within the context of the historic built environment. But I think the fact I was doing it as part of a PhD rather than as part of a bigger research project also allowed me to reflect critically on the approach to assessing value and significance of buildings by practitioners and policymakers in the heritage sector. And really I think that's important because there has been quite a lot of criticism about those processes of, you know, what we choose to be significant and of value. And really the story of the development of many of these buildings, Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, mosques, Gurdwaras, is one of adaptive reuse. So they tend to follow a general pattern of worship beginning initially in residential property before moving into larger previously used buildings, and then maybe later on a new and purpose-built building will be created. And really, heritage policy has received criticism for a focus on original use and aesthetic value, which is believed to be afforded higher levels of importance. So kind of straight away, looking at these kinds of buildings, it was clear that their true value and significance, whatever that might be, wouldn't necessarily be understood in this way. So that was the starting point. So today I just want to give you a really brief overview of what it was that I did, and really just looking at a few key case studies from the project. So briefly I want to outline some historical background to the development of Gurdwaras before I look at some specific examples, and then finish with some key findings of the project. So first of all, Sikhism, which I'm sure many of you do know about. I'm not sure, because when I started I had no idea what Sikhism was or any kind of aspect of it at all. So it has origins in 15th century Punjab. It's now the 5th largest of the world religions, and it has almost 30 million followers worldwide. It's a monotheistic religion marked by a devotion to a succession of 10 gurus, beginning with Guru Nanak and ending with Guru Gobind Singh. And prior to his death in 1708, he declared that the Guru Granth Sahib, which consisted of writings compiled by all of the gurus and other people as well, was thereafter considered the physical embodiment of the Guru, to whose words Sikhs should turn for guidance and authority. So essentially this then became the living Guru that all Sikhs could turn to for that guidance. And a copy of the Guru Granth Sahib is now found within each Gurdwara right across the world. And in every one it is treated as a kind of a living thing. The Golden Temple, I'm sure you've all seen a picture of this before, or visited even. This really remains the spiritual focus for Sikhs across the world. It's in Amritsar, in Indian Punjab. This really, although it is this spiritual focus, you won't necessarily find other Gurdwaras across the world that look like this. So it's not really used necessarily for specific inspiration in terms of architectural design. Within Sikhism, there are no specific architectural requirements, so you do find that there's great diversity in the kinds of buildings that they kind of encompass. And there are a few universal characteristics beyond the Nishan Sahib, which is the really tall, big orange flagpole, which you might have seen, which really just denotes that a Gurdwara is there, and it does have some spiritual significance to some people as well. So migration of Sikhs to Britain didn't really occur on any great scale until the mid to late 20th century, although this was preceded by long-established networks of movement from South Asia to Britain. So kind of initially from West Punjab, so modern-day Pakistan, in the 1930s, people kind of moved to predominantly port cities like Cardiff and Glasgow. Later on, you can see that more substantial migration occurred, mostly kind of in line with post-war reconstruction of Britain. So the government here kind of actively sought a workforce from India to come and help kind of support with labour. And also the partition of India in 1947 led to the migration of quite a large number of people. Later on, in the 60s and 70s, there's also quite a lot of migration from East Africa due to Africanization programs in countries like Kenya, and specifically in Leicester, we had quite a lot of people moving to the city through those channels as well. On the right here, you can see a map of all of the Gurdwaras in England as of about 2 years ago, and I'm sure it's already changed because it changes quite quickly. So you can see that predominantly Gurdwaras have developed in areas of London, specifically West London, also the West Midlands and across the East Midlands as well, and across northern towns and cities as well. So these are just 3 of the case studies I looked at as part of my work, and ones that I would like to talk to you a little bit about today. So first of all, we've got Guru Tegh Bahador Gurdwara, which is in Leicester, which you might recognise. It's on East Park Road, and it's quite a really big building actually. So this is just kind of one of the narrower sides of the building, and it was originally a shoe warehouse. It opened in 1989 as a Gurdwara, and since then there have been kind of gradual renovations, including the changing of the windows to double glazing and with some stained glass as well. I believe there are solar panels on the roof, which I've never seen, but I think they're there. And other kind of changes as well, like a porch and a dome over the porch to the rear of the building. In the middle is Gurdwara Sri Guru Singh Sabha in Southall. This is one of the biggest Gurdwaras in the country. It was designed by an architect, and it was designed and built for about £17 million and opened in 2003. So that's kind of a newer example really of what's been happening in the past couple of decades. And then finally the Singh Sabha Gurdwara in Southampton, which was a former Church of England church. It's Grade 2 listed, and you can see there's very little in the way of architectural changes been made. So before I go on to discuss those examples in more detail, I'd like to just take you around Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Leicester, which is in Holy Bones, and this kind of marks the initial stage of my research, which was to make links with people and go and have them show me around the buildings, do kind of interviews with them while we're going, so that I could understand how they were used and how people valued them on an everyday basis. And really this was to highlight, what the social, communal and spiritual values of these buildings might be, to kind of move it away from a focus on this aesthetic and historic value that would predominate perhaps other studies. So as you go into Guru Nanak Gurdwara, one of the first things you'll see is the shoe room, where you take off your shoes, and you're also reminded to cover your head as well, and wash your hands and feet if you choose, although in this country that is by no means required. And really it's all about respect. So as soon as you go into a building, into a Gurdwara building, you have to show a high level of respect to the Guru Granth Sahib, the fact that the Guru Granth Sahib is in that building, it's the home of the Guru, so from the moment you enter, you have to kind of show that respect. And then you move into the prayer hall, and this is Palki Sahib, which is where the Guru Granth Sahib will be brought every day from the Sachkhand or bedroom where it's placed at night. Often the Sachkhand will have a 4-poster bed kind of with all the trimmings and sometimes kind of dehumidifiers, heaters to make the place really comfortable, as though there is a person living there. So each morning it's brought out and placed on the Palki Sahib and is read during services and throughout the day. Kind of overwhelmingly, in every single interview I did, it was the Guru Granth Sahib that made a place a Gurdwara. It's the Guru Granth Sahib that makes it significant as a place to people, and it's because of his presence that all of the other practices and things that happen in the Gurdwara actually occur. So a lot of people say things like, it is the Gurdwara, without it, that it can't be a Gurdwara. He is the pivot around which the whole Gurdwara operates. And other really key practices, because of this presence, include the tradition of Langa, which started with the first Guru, Guru Nanak. And the idea is that it kind of stops people from discriminating against each other. So everybody kind of pitches in, basically, in terms of the preparation of the food in the first place and the serving of the food. everybody sits and eats it together, everybody has the same thing and sits on the same level. So your social standing shouldn't actually influence how it is that what it is that you eat and who prepares it and who serves it and that kind of thing. And it is an extremely important part of Sikhism. And again, it's something that's found in every Gurdwara across the world. It's really important spiritually as well. The food is blessed before it is served. And people might sit and choose to actually recite prayers as they eat and things like that. Langa really, it kind of feeds into the principle of seva, which is a kind of wider consideration in Sikhism for kind of giving something back to community. So it's the idea that you give a percentage of your wage, it could be your time, skills, labour, to the wider community, but also within the Gurdwara as well. And we can see that, and we hear it in the narratives of the development of the Gurdwaras themselves. So in the case, returning back to Guru Teg Bahador Gurdwara in Leicester, which was a shoe warehouse, narratives of the initial development of the building in 1989 revolve around the fact that it was full of thousands of wooden racks that all had to be removed. And all of that work, all of that manual labour was done by the community themselves. And it was all a big voluntary effort, and it's been kind of, people reflect back on it very fondly. And yeah, so you can see that the social and religious and communal narratives are all there, and it all kind of takes place in the development of these buildings themselves. And you can also see examples of where Sikh values are entwined with the physical fabric in other Gurdwaras as well. So this is Guru Nanak Nishkam Suik Jardha in Birmingham. The building slowly developed from a really big row of terrace houses with voluntary support from the community, and that took place over about 40 years. And when I was there, I was showed a mosaic which is inside the main dome of the building, and I've been told how a Muslim craftsperson made it for the Gurdwara as he wanted to contribute to this development of the building. The story was told at this building, but also elsewhere in the country as well, so it's a really well-known narrative, and it's one that's used, again, to kind of demonstrate Sikh values of religious equality, basically. So everybody working together, no matter what your faith is. And you can see this especially in the ongoing religious function of some buildings. So this is Singh Sabha Gurdwara in Southampton, which was converted from a Church of England church. It is Grade 2 listed, and covenants of the sale state that the bell has to remain but can't be rung. Kind of Christian mosaics had to be removed before sale to the Sikh community, and other things like that took place. The Sikh community themselves seem to be really happy that this building has continued to be used as a religious space. So I was told one story there about a gentleman who had decided to visit the building he was part of the Christian community, so he was a parishioner, and he really wanted to just go and see what had happened within the building and how it had changed. So he was shown what is now the Langa Hall on the ground floor. The Sikh community have added a mezzanine level, which you can see kind of below the highest windows, and that's where the prayer hall is. And when he was offered a kind of tour of the building and to go up to the prayer hall, he said he didn't want to go up, and he kind of felt a sense of sadness that this had happened to the building, that it had been sold to another community, and that it was no longer being used as a church. That you kind of felt the opposite in terms of the feelings of the Sikh community. They seemed really happy that it was once a Christian building and it had continued to be used as a place of God. And it didn't matter what faith it was the fact that it is still a religious place that was important to them. So there's a kind of, you can see a little bit of discrepancy between the two communities there. With some participants as well, some interviewees, they kind of recognised that this place was really significant to people in the past as well, and that those communities continue to live in that area. and the building continues to have that spiritual significance for some people, or at least a social and communal significance. So they recognised that the mosaics were important enough to be taken away, but they were unaware of what actually they encompassed at the time. Moving on now to a very different example. So this is Singh South Hall, which was built for £17 million. It's built on a really large scale. This is one of the prayer halls. This is the main prayer hall. And to the right you can see an example of one of the stained glass windows. What was really interesting here was that although the feeling was that it was a really beautiful building and that people from across the country really wanted to come to visit the building and take part in really big events, and kind of weddings and things like that, on a day-to-day basis, it was felt that it didn't kind of work as successfully as a Gurdwara, as some of the smaller, more kind of temporary spaces. So actually, in preparation for this building being built and opened, the community did open a temporary Gurdwara, which is still used by that community now, even though this one has been open and available all this time. And really the reason is that they think it, for those kind of everyday practices, it is better suited. It's all on one floor, it's kind of a warehouse type building. The management committee actually choose not to sit in this new building, but continue to sit in the temporary building so that they are more accessible to the local community. In this building, their offices were built on the second floor and they're quite difficult to access for people. I was also told about other mistakes in the design of the building by the architects. They hadn't factored in the need for lots of sinks in certain places for people to be able to wash their hands and feel comfortable. It's this idea of mistakes in the design that you didn't necessarily hear about in some of the other cases. And it had a lot to do with the fact that this building was built as a complete building. They used the kind of maximum square footage they could. There's very little car parking, which causes problems for people, but it also means that it can't be extended and it can't be changed. So they can't kind of keep it purposeful and relevant according to their changing needs over time. And that seemed to be a big problem. It also highlighted the fact that the management committees of these buildings changes quite frequently. It should change every few years. Sometimes people are in place for a lot longer, but generally these places develop at a period of time according to the wishes of a select group of people, which might not necessarily be shared by the wider community as well. Elsewhere, I think it's important to make the point that a purpose-built building isn't necessarily the end point for Sikh communities. It's not necessarily what they wish to achieve. And in a lot of cases, they don't wish to change the exterior of the building to look any more like a Gurdwara, although what a Gurdwara looks like is also something that really wasn't consistent at all across the country either. So again, going back to Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Leicester, this is the building as it was at the time when I did my research. I think it still looks the same way now. But on the right is one of many, many plans that have been kind of developed over the past 30 years for potential changes to the exterior of the building that have actually never come to fruition. This one is one of the more elaborate designs, and this kind of came about in a time where the City Council in Leicester were actually actively encouraging more traditional designs for places of worship in the city. So this might not have been kind of related to the needs and desires of the community itself. They may have actually been quite influenced by the local planning and council teams. So I kind of started to build up a picture of this as not being purely based on the needs and desires of the community itself, but also you had lots of other factors influencing it as well, including local authority planning. Really, just moving on now, I'm not sure what time it is. But some of the key findings of my research, really the focus was on establishing how Gurdwaras are valued by the people who use them. And really, as I've said, it was overwhelmingly clear that they were valued as the home of the Guru Granth Sahib and the related everyday practices. Gurdwaras are places which symbolise Sikh religious and social values. Everyone is welcome, everyone is treated equally, and things like seva are really important. It's also really important for the buildings to remain useful, relevant and purposeful, not only to the immediate community but the wider community as well. So in most cases, the management committee and the community would really actively seek to build relationships with other groups, other religious groups and civic groups as well, within their kind of local communities. So then really feeding back to what the overall aims of the project were and what this can say and do and help in terms of heritage policy and practice. I think it's really, one of the really important things was to be able to look at how those identified social and communal values can actually be seen or understood in terms of the physical form of the buildings themselves. And really the buildings are shaped by everyday practice, and the Gurdwara is a physical manifestation which is entwined with those values and the principle of seva, as we've seen in the example of the mosaic dome, also the ongoing religious function of some buildings if they were former churches. There's also an ongoing willingness to contribute labour and skills to development projects, and I think that's quite key in cases where the communities are now quite kind of financially strong, because I suppose kind of earlier on it was a necessity of these communities to actually do development work and things themselves and use voluntary effort. But that has continued even kind of going into the more purpose-built, newly built cases. Also, specific materials and styles are not consistently sought, but they are still important to people. So people do still care about the aesthetics of the buildings, it's just that it's more contextually specific. So really it's understanding that and understanding how that would work within national policy and guidance is quite difficult, but definitely something to be aware of. So yeah, implications for heritage policy. Need to think about a focus on social and communal values as well as historic and aesthetic, and how to best approach appropriately identifying and recognising heritage significance, especially when change may be important. So in a lot of these places, it's clear that they require that flexibility in order to change according to changing needs within the community. And that's everything. And I hope that was clear, because I'm not sure it was. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was